Good business, Banyan.
All right, thief, suppose you tell me what my business is. Go on, tell me.
Old Hollywood was full of stars who looked tough on screen, but which of them could back it up behind the scenes? Here are 10 of the toughest stars in old Hollywood who walked the talk.
Look at your eyes.
What's wrong with my eyes?
Well, they're red. Bloodshot.
You ought to see him from...
Number 10. Lee Marvin. With years of portraying never-say-die tough guys and villains under his belt, Lee Marvin became one of the mainstays in cinema and television through the 1950s and 1960s. But don't let his charming bravado deceive you, because he was just as tough in person. He was the man who took no prisoners, the man you wouldn't want to mess with, and frankly speaking, the guy who started it all in modern America cinema violence. Remember his intense portrayal of the sadistic gangster Vince Stone in Fritz Lang's gritty 1953 film noir The Big Heat? There, his animalistic rage was one for the ages, and boy, what a good ending it was. Born in 1942 in New York City, Marvin had a particularly interesting upbringing. On the one hand, his father was a World War I veteran, and his family heritage traced back to Confederate General Robert E. Lee. But still, life was far from easy. Growing up, Marvin struggled with ADHD and dyslexia, had poor academic performance, and was the victim of frequent disciplinary issues. He even got expelled from several schools, including a shocking incident where he threw a classmate out of a second-floor window. He was becoming a train wreck and likely would have had a disappointing life had it not been for World War II. Marvin enlisted in the Marine Corps, but he was turned down because he hadn't finished his schooling. Repentant, he kept his head low and returned to St. Leo's College Preparatory School. Soon he became a good sniper scout and served in the Pacific Theater, where he participated in 21 assaults on Japanese-held islands, most notably the Battle of Saipan, where Marvin just refused to fail. Despite being severely wounded by machine gun fire, getting a shot to the foot from an enemy sniper, and also cutting his sciatic nerve, Martin served with his heart out and won the battle with his unyielding comrades. For his bravery, skill, and determination, he earned several military honors, including the Purple Heart and Navy Commendation Medal. After World War II, Marvin worked as a plumber's assistant at a community theater in upstate New York. Filling in for a sick actor, he discovered his passion for acting and joined the company, earning a meager $7 a week. But using his GI Bill benefits, he attended the American Theater Wing, performing in local theater and landing small TV roles, before making his Broadway debut in the 1951 production of Uniform of Flesh, and well, the rest was history. From there, Martin became a mainstay in the film industry, building a reputation as a tough guy both on-screen and off. And with scores of films under his belt, he was loved by all and super successful. Some of his most iconic roles included starring in The Dirty Dozen, where he earned many appraisals for his part, and Cat Ballou, where his performance as both a washed-up gunslinger and his villainous brother earned him an Academy Award for Best Actor. However, for all of his strengths, Martin was a man of many vices. He was known to smoke up to 6 packs a day of cigarettes and often indulged in alcohol to the point where it delayed production. One particularly bizarre incident was on the set of The Dirty Dozen, where Marvin had to be dragged from a pub to film a scene. With deteriorating health, he was hospitalized for 2 weeks in 1986 due to complications from valley fever, which eventually led to intestinal ruptures and a colonectomy. A year later, he was hospitalized again due to a rundown condition related to the flu. But sadly, he didn't make it. He suffered a fatal heart attack on August 29th at the age of 63. But if you think he gets as tough as it gets, wait until you hear about the next star. Number 9. Christopher Lee. While most actors merely pretend to be tough guys or villains, Sir Christopher Lee was all about that life. Spanning over 6 decades, his career was littered with portrayals of some of the most iconic evil characters on television, ranging from Dracula to Saruman in The Lord of the Rings. But what many don't know is that before Lee ever brought shivers down the audience's spine, he was a terror to the Axis on the battlefields of World War II. Born in 1922 to a British officer and descendant of Italian aristocracy, Lee's family was relatively comfortable. But his formative years were steeped in military history. One might even say he was destined for a life of service. He joined the British Royal Air Force in 1940 as an intelligence officer before getting assigned to the Long Range Desert Group, an elite unit that specialized in sabotage and reconnaissance missions in North Africa. Moving covertly behind enemy lines, Lee was a real-life Bond who took part in all kinds of operations, ranging from intelligence gathering to sabotaging airfields and even disabling enemy aircraft. But sadly, the horrors of war left a lasting impression on Lee. Serving in the front lines, he witnessed firsthand the atrocities of battle, mutilation, bloodshed, and torture. This made him hardened and somewhat indifferent. But as macabre as it sounds, I personally think his view adds more depth and realism to the villains he portrayed later in life. Point Q, Francisco Scaramanga. After the war, Lee had to dig deep to find a new purpose in the entertainment industry, where he'd eventually work with his cousin Ian Fleming, the brain behind James Bond. However, before that, his transition to the screen wasn't without struggle. Casting directors initially balked at his towering 6'5" frame, believing he was too imposing for romantic roles. But once he made his big break in 1957's The Curse of Frankenstein, everything began to fall into place. He entered Hammer Films, the studio that would cement his status as a horror icon, and acted as Dracula in Horror of Dracula a year later. His portrayal of the Count was so successful that Lee would go on to reprise it multiple times, making him almost synonymous with the Vampire Lord. But make no mistake, Lee was much more than just a horror star. His range extended into historical drama, mystery, and even fantasy as Saruman in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Looking back, much of Lee's life in the military remains an enigma. On the one hand, most of his military service records remain classified, and the actor himself was rather reluctant to share many details of his wartime experiences. But still, what we do know, though, is that after his retirement, Lee Marvin was honored with an individual decoration for battlefield bravery from the Czech, Yugoslav, British, and Polish governments. In 2009, he was knighted for his contributions to drama and charity and received the BAFTA and BFI fellowships in 2011 and 2013, respectively.
Solving your problems isn't our line. We deal in lead, friend.
So do I. We're in the same business, huh?
Only as competitors.
Number 8. Steve McQueen. Born in Beech Grove, Indiana in 1930, Steve McQueen had an early life that reads like a script for one of his hard-bitten characters. He was abandoned by both of his parents, had to fend for himself on the streets at the age of 9, and struggled in school because he was dyslexic and partially deaf. Being tough wasn't a luxury he could do without on the streets, but it got him into a lot of trouble. He ran a street gang that was involved in petty theft from time to time. His path to redemption began when he enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps in 1947. He was 17 at the time and had to get permission from his mother. At first, he struggled with service discipline and was relegated to private 7 times. He also spent a 41-day term at the brig for resisting arrest. He went AWOL and was caught with his girlfriend, Barbara Ross, instead of returning to the base after his pass. Looking back, his release marked a turning point. McQueen became more focused on self-improvement and embraced the Marines' discipline, later stating that the Marines made a man out of him. In one Arctic training exercise, he saved the lives of 5 Marines when their tank fell through the ice. After his stint in the military, McQueen decided to go into acting. He studied in New York City and took up odd jobs before landing his big break, a starring role in 1958's The Blob and as a bounty hunter in the TV series Wanted Dead or Alive. From there, he starred in some of the most iconic films of the 1960s, including The Magnificent Seven and The Great Escape, solidifying his status as one of Hollywood's most magnetic leading men. Whether it was performing his own stunts in movies or blitzing with motorcycles and cars in real life, McQueen wasn't just about playing being tough. He lived it. He was that guy. By 1974, he had already become the highest paid actor in Hollywood and sat at the pinnacle of the industry. Personally, one thing we love about McQueen is that despite his fame and fortune, McQueen never forgot his rough and humble beginnings. In interviews, he often related on his turbulent childhood and the deep scars it left behind, while praising the military discipline for making him a better person. This was what made him super compelling and relatable to fans. His entire life was a testament to sheer willpower and determination, but sadly, it made him too stubborn. His smoking habits deteriorated his health, and he developed a persistent cough in early 1978 that developed into shortness of breath. After filming The Hunter, it was revealed that he had cancer associated with asbestos exposure, for which there is no known cure. Worried, he dropped cigarettes, but his condition worsened, and soon he had huge tumors on his abdomen. Despite being warned by his doctors in the U.S. that the tumor was inoperable and his heart wouldn't handle the surgery, McQueen still went ahead. Using the alias Samuel Shepard, he checked into a small clinic in Juarez, where the staff had no idea who he really was. He died just 12 hours after the surgery from a heart attack. Number 7. Bruce Lee. At one point, Bruce Lee was the biggest martial arts star in Hollywood. His films like Fist of Fury, Enter the Dragon, and Game of Death not only bridged the gap between the East and West, but awakened America's sleeping love for the arts. But beyond the movies, Lee was a true martial arts master known for having impeccable skill and technique. He trained tirelessly every day, ran his own moves, and was at the peak of his niche. Unfortunately, his life was cut short when he died at just 32 years old, leaving fans to wonder what more he could have achieved. You see, Lee didn't just star in movies. He was a master of several forms, including boxing, karate, judo, taekwondo, and many more. Ever heard of Jeet Kune Do? It is a hybrid martial arts philosophy that has long influenced future fighters, including in the world of MMA, and it was all because of one man. He didn't stop at perfecting his own skills, though. He trained some of the biggest names in martial arts, like Chuck Norris, Joe Louis, and even his son Brandon Lee, who also tragically died at a young age. But that's another story for another day. Personally, what we find truly remarkable about Lee is that his rise to the top was far from accidental. He knew from a young age that he wanted to be the best fighter in the world, and he worked tirelessly to achieve just that. As a matter of fact, his wife once said that Lee would spend every free moment he had to train and focus on improving his techniques, especially his core, as he believed it was key to every movement and fighting style. He often trained with punching bags that weighed over 135 kilograms, 3 times the weight of standard bags. If you think that's impossible, wait till you find out he often tore through them with relative ease. And who could forget his 1-inch punch? According to reports, Lee could deliver a punch from just an inch away with the force of a car crash at 50 kilometers per hour. But it wasn't just super strength that set Bruce apart. His speed was also legendary. In fact, he was so fast that directors had trouble filming him during shoots. He could throw 9 punches and 6 kicks in just 1 second. Speed's too fast for the camera to keep up. Imagine having to slow down just so production could proceed. Well, that was the life of Bruce Lee. But for all of his amazing, almost otherworldly feats, he died at the age of 32 years in 1973 under mysterious circumstances. To date, the cause of death remains unknown, although interesting theories have been proposed, from assassination by gangsters to kidney issues and even heat stroke. In any case, however, Lee lived a very fulfilling life. He was named one of the 100 most important people of the 20th century and single-handedly promoted Hong Kong action cinema. Can you guess who's next? Number 6. Charles Bronson. Known worldwide for his tough guy roles in action films, it'd be impossible to make this list without talking about Charles Bronson. He had rugged looks and a strong build to match, and he was often described as having granite features and a brawny physique. His performances, particularly in movies like The Magnificent Seven and The Great Escape, earned him critical praise and made him a fan favorite in the industry, especially in Europe, where his career really took off in the late 1960s. But what if I told you all of Bronson's success came after a difficult and frankly impoverished childhood? He was born into a Roman Catholic family of Lithuanian descent as the 11th of 15 children. Growing up in a poor coal mining town, the family endured extreme hardship, more so in the Great Depression, often lacking basic necessities like food and clothing, the latter of which Bronson himself stated he wore his sister's hand-me-down dresses to school. Additionally, despite having a large family, they all lived in a small, cold-water shack near coal car tracks. They slept in shifts because there wasn't enough space for everyone. And to make things worse, he didn't even have a good relationship with his father. The only thing he could remember about his old man was that whenever his mother announced that he was coming home, all of the children would hide. After his father died of cancer in 1933, Bronson began working in the coal mines, initially in the mining office and later in the pit, earning $1 every week with double shifts. However, like some of the men we've talked about so far, World War II marked a significant turning point. He served in the United States Army Air Forces as an aerial gunner, flying 25 combat missions and earning a Purple Heart for injuries sustained in battle. After the war, he found odd jobs, before being hired to paint scenery for a local theater group, which led him to minor acting roles and eventually a move to Hollywood. He shared an apartment with Jack Klugman and enrolled in acting classes at the Pasadena Playhouse, where his journey to stardom began. After his big break, a couple of misses, and a handful of hits in between, Bronson's life began to look up. By 1968, he had become one of the biggest stars in European films, gaining recognition for his acting abilities and a lot of money in his pockets. Many of his films were box office hits that grossed millions, and this gave him the edge to command even larger salaries, especially for his roles in movies like Death Wish 2 in the 1980s. At his prime, Bronson was known for being reserved, a bit antisocial, and having a domineering vibe that was glaring to both cast and crew. To buttress this, did you know that while filming Telephone in 1977, actress Lee Remick once refused to touch Bronson's face, despite it being needed for a scene? Yep, she boldly stated that she wouldn't dare to get on his nerves. Number 5. Douglas Elton Fairbanks Jr. Unlike Charles Bronson and just about everyone we've talked about thus far, Douglas Fairbanks Jr. was born into a life of wealth and fame. As the only child of actor Douglas Fairbanks, one of the first icons of cinema, and Anna Beth Sully, the daughter of a wealthy industrialist, it didn't take long for Junior to be thrust into the limelight. Take, for instance, his dad. Known for his legendary swashbuckling roles in films such as The Mark of Zorro, Robin Hood, and The Thief of Baghdad, Mr. Banks was one of Hollywood's original stars. For little Junior, however, the apple didn't fall far from the tree. As a child, he made brief appearances in his father's films, and at the age of 13, he was offered a lucrative contract with Paramount Pictures to the tune of $1,000 a week. Despite his father's concerns, Junior arrived in Hollywood in 1923 to feature on Steven Steps Out. But given it failed to impress both fans and critics alike, Junior and Paramount ended the contract by mutual consent. Determined to get out of his father's shadow, Junior moved to Paris to resume his studies, only to return a year later to work in Hollywood on what he described as starvation wages. It wasn't long, however, before his fortunes changed. Samuel Goldwyn cast him in 1925's Stella Dallas, which became his first box office success, and from there, he took on supporting roles in The American Venus, Padlock, and Man Bait. Additionally, he made a solid performance in the stage production of Young Woodley that earned him critical praise and further cemented his standing as a promising young actor. At this point, Junior's rise to stardom was almost inevitable. He played a good role and was involved in a high-profile romance with Joan Crawford. But just as Fairbanks was reaching his prime in the industry, the world would call him on to serve in a very different capacity. During World War II, Junior was commissioned as a reserve officer in the U.S. Navy. There he was assigned to Lord Mountbatten's commando staff in the United Kingdom, playing crucial roles in some of the war's most daring operations, including the invasion of Sicily. But that's not all. He also led one of the most intriguing units of the war, the Beach Jumpers, a deception force created to mislead the enemy about the location and scale of amphibious landings. For this, he was awarded the United States Navy Legion of Merit, the Italian War Cross for military valor, and the British Distinguished Service Cross. Additionally, he also received the Silver Star for Valor, displayed while serving on PT boats, and was made an officer of the National Order of the Southern Cross. With all of his success in the war, one would think his transition back to Hollywood would be smooth and successful, right? Well, not quite. Yes, his military fame earned him several opportunities in the industry, but they were often so mediocre, including Sinbad the Sailor, which was not a big hit. He even wrote and produced 1947's The Exile, which again was another box office disappointment. After a few so-so appearances and kind of memorable roles, Junior turned to several successful businesses, like manufacturing ballpoint pens, real estate, management of copyrighted theatrical works, and film production. He died at the age of 90 of a heart attack, with 3 stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in his name. Our next star, however, took things to an extreme that even Hollywood couldn't script.
Shoot them! They're too far, they're moving too fast.
Number 4, John Wayne. Say what you will about John Wayne's right-wing political stance, but there's no denying that he was one of the toughest, most unyielding figures in American cinematic history. We're talking about a man who defined an entire era of filmmaking, portraying a rugged and unbreakable cowboy who could outdrink, outfight, and outshoot anyone who dared to cross his path. Wayne built his career from scratch around playing the kind of man who would never look for a fight, but wouldn't back down from one either. The Western niche was his for the taking, and he did it with an unprecedented, unmatched grit and machismo that is still being praised to this very day. Born Marion Morrison, before changing his name to John Wayne, was the quintessential symbol of masculine ruggedness. Despite being in an era where stars weren't exactly free to decide the kind of role they'd play in movies, he made it crystal clear that in every role, he was only going to play what he considered a real man, tough, fair, and courageous, standing up for what was right. I mean, sure, you can say he was eventually typecast, but given that's all he wanted, wouldn't you say it's a solid win? Throughout his career, Wayne featured in everything from low-budget throwaway flicks to iconic Western box office hits, and fans were always excited to see his iconic gunslinging swagger on horseback. The only thing you can attribute to him is the scrutiny he received for dodging the draft to serve in World War II. Many criticized him for being a coward who stayed behind in Hollywood, playing soldiers on the screen while real men fought overseas. But could that really be true, though? Personally, I think we differ because there was more to the story than meets the eye. For one, John Wayne was in his mid-30s when the war started, and was actually an established star in Hollywood. By the time he would have completed boot camp, he would have been 36, and definitely on the older side for a combat position. And don't even get us started on the fact that his face and reputation were so well known by that point that it would have been impossible for the military to place him on the front lines. There, he wouldn't have been able to blend in and would have been an obvious target for enemy soldiers. So you see, Wayne's involvement in actual combat may have been more of a risk than a help, at least in the eyes of the military. But while Wayne's public image wasn't helped by the fact that many other Hollywood stars like Clark Gable and Jimmy Stewart did serve in the war, it's definitely worth mentioning that John Wayne's place in American film history remains unshaken. From the silent era of the 1920s through the American New Wave and post-war, he appeared in a total of 179 film and television productions. For 3 consecutive decades, he was one of the top box office draws and featured with many other bright stars of his era. The cherry on the top, in 1999, the American Film Institute named Wayne as one of the greatest male stars of classic American cinema. But before we go into Hollywood's next macho figure, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on post notifications so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos. It only takes a second and you'll be in the loop when we drop a great rundown throughout Hollywood history next. Done that already? Alright, then can you guess who's next? Here's a hint. He was one of the men who served in the war. Number 3. Clark Gable. Crowned King of Hollywood, Clark Gable's rich career spanned 37 years, starring in over 60 films across various genres. But while his rugged charm and undeniable screen presence made him one of the most iconic stars of classic American cinema, it is his backstory that's the stuff of legend. Born in Candace, Ohio, Gable experienced early tragedy. His mother passed away when he was less than a year old. As a teenager, he discovered a passion for acting and eventually transitioned from theater to Hollywood, where he started in small roles before his talent began to shine through. Enter the 1930s, and his career was brighter than the moon. He had earned the prestigious Academy Award for Best Actor in It Happened One Night, and was one of the most sought-after men in entertainment. By the end of the decade, he was rich, happily married, and had already solidified his place in film history thanks to his iconic role as Rhett Butler in 1939's Gone with the Wind. But life, as they say, is often fickle. You can be on top of the world in one moment and crash down in the next. In 1942, Gable had one of the most devastating moments in his life. His wife, Carol Lombard, crashed into a mountain near Las Vegas following a war bond tour. Before boarding the flight, Lombard sent Gable a telegram urging him to join the war effort. Stricken by grief, Gable saw her message as a final request and immediately enlisted in the Army Air Corps at the age of 41, much to the horror of MGM. There he flew 5 bombing missions over Germany with such gusto that even Nazi Air Minister Hermann Göring took notice. You see, Gable just happened to be Hitler's favorite American film star, so Hermann Göring tagged him as one of 3 American pilots wanted dead or alive. Cash and promotion were provided as reward, but when the dust had settled, Göring had paid out for all but one, Gable. When the war ended, MGM tried to force his way back, but sadly the Gable of Red Dust, San Francisco, Manhattan Melodrama, and Gone with the Wind were gone. Like so many other combat veterans, Gable was a completely changed man. He was unhappy, lost his wife and father, and suffered from the shock of war. Refusing to be rushed into another career killer like Adventure or Parnell, Gable took a really long time off the industry. After much deliberation pouring through scripts offered to him, Clark Gable finally agreed to make a film called The Hucksters with Ava Gardner. Critics loved the film, it earned money, and Clark Gable was finally back. His outstanding career continued with 1961's The Misfits, starring Marilyn Monroe, the final picture for both stars.
Your refusal to comply with my orders has endangered the entire success of this mission. I can't have you sent to a penal colony for this.
That you can, sir. But I won't lower the screen.
Number 2. James Doohan. Adored by many as Star Trek's Scotty, James Doohan became a household name in America, but his screen life is a shadow of what truly made him famous. Born in Vancouver, British Columbia in 1920, his early life gave little hint of the legendary career that lay ahead. Instead of growing up in Hollywood or even having a passion for the arts at a young age, he initially pursued a technical education and could have become an engineer. However, by the time he reached adulthood, the world was at war, and Doohan, like so many men of his generation, answered the ultimate call to serve. In 1938, he enlisted with the 102nd Royal Canadian Army Cadet Corps, but while you'd think a scrawny young prospect of an engineer would make an uneventful soldier, Doohan was so impressive that he rose to the rank of lieutenant. During World War II, his bravery and skill shone like a million stars that he was to be deployed to England with the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division, where he trained for the heroic role he would play in the war's most significant event, D-Day. On the 6th of June 1944, Doohan landed on Juno Beach as part of the Allied invasion of Normandy. During the battle, he and his unit won against all odds despite being caught between a minefield and German machine guns. Talk about the devil in the deep blue sea. He was injured many times during the chaos. 4 bullets damaged his calf, 1 severed the middle finger on his right hand, and another one headed for his chest was stopped by a silver cigarette box that his brother had given him as a luck charm. But as fortuitous as that seems, the true twist came when Duan discovered he had been struck by a Bren-Light machine gun, not by German fire, but by a jittery Canadian guard. Despite these near-fatal injuries, Duan miraculously survived, but he lived the remainder of his life without a finger. After recovering, Duan joined a squadron in the Royal Air Force, where he flew a Taylorcraft Oster Mark IV. But like the daredevil he was, his reputation only grew, especially after he famously flew between two telegraph poles just to prove it could be done. He wasn't called the craziest pilot of the Canadian Air Force for nothing. Post-World War II, James Duan returned to Canada. However, after hearing a radio play, he decided he could do a better job than the voice actors and changed his major from technical to theater. But it's safe to say he was right all along. With 4,000 episodes on radio and 450 on television, he was head and shoulders above his peers and one of the most versatile voice actors in the business. He became so famous that followers credited him with sparking their interest in engineering, astronomy, and other technical disciplines. Among these was the engineer-turned-astronaut Neil Armstrong. Think that was impressive? Well, our next star went above and beyond anything we've seen before. Number 1. Audie Murphy. You didn't think we were going to talk about the toughest actors in old Hollywood without mentioning Mr. Macho himself, did you? Born into a struggling family in Texas, Murphy had to grow quickly. His father abandoned the family when he was young, and his mother sadly passed away when he was just a teenager. Murphy could have easily died as a poor, unhealthy man with little dreams, but instead, he used his crisis as a fuel. As the new breadwinner, he left school in the 5th grade to help support his siblings by picking cotton and hunting with a rifle to keep food on the table. When World War II broke out, the Navy and Marines all rejected him because he was too young and underweight. And he was only able to enroll in the Army after falsifying his birthday to satisfy the minimum age requirement, with the assistance of his elder sister. But boy, was he a great soldier. Murphy fought in some of the most intense fights in the European theater, from Sicily to Rome's liberation and the invasion of southern France. And guess what? Despite multiple sicknesses and injuries throughout his service, he became one of World War II's most recognized and honored warriors, having killed up to 241 enemy troops. We'll be the first to admit Murphy's war exploits sound almost too incredible to believe, but he received every military combat award for valor available from the United States Army, as well as French and Belgian awards for heroism. At just 19 years old, Murphy earned the Medal of Honor for extraordinary bravery during the Colmar Pocket in France in January 1945. Despite being severely wounded, he stood his ground and single-handedly held off a company of German soldiers for an hour before leading a successful counterattack with superhuman resolve. After the war, Murphy set his sights on Hollywood, where he appeared in over 40 films, including The Hell and Back, which was actually based on his biography. Within his filmography, Murphy's most notable performances were usually westerns, but he also appeared on celebrity television shows and features in the series Whispering Smith. Yet despite his success, the ghosts of battle continued to haunt him. Murphy, who suffered from battle fatigue, a severe type of PTSD, frequently slept with a loaded revolver under his pillow and got addicted to sleeping pills. However, regardless of the conflicts and a few financial difficulties, he refused offers to appear in alcohol and cigarette advertising to set a positive example. In 1971, at the age of 45, Murphy was unfortunately in a ghastly air crash that claimed his life. But even in death, he was a hero, buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. And with that, we wrap up our journey through the lives of 10 of Hollywood's toughest stars. If you've enjoyed the video as much as we did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments if there's anyone else you think we should have covered. Finally, make sure you check out the next video currently on your screen for yet another savory walk through Hollywood history.